All right, back to the story. So, like I said, in college, I went to visit my grandpa in Kauai. My grandpa was a minister at the time. He gave like a sermon, and in the sermon he said how men tend to be less relation oriented than women, and he said this in front of the congregation. And after the sermon, I talked to my grandpa. I was like, "Grandpa, you made a generalization," because I'm learning at UCSD where we're learning kind of like communist type of stuff. But I'm like, "Grandpa, you made a generalization about women. Don't say that women tend to be relation oriented, because that's a generalization. There's men who are relation oriented. There's men who's INTPs, and there's women who's SJs, and don't make any generalizations." But my grandpa, he's like, that's a good point. Because I guess it is true. In the flow, you see the things as they are, and a generalization is not necessarily as it is, but also sometimes a generalization can be as it is. You know what I mean? But my grandpa, I think, because my grandpa was like, oh, well, maybe, Ryan seems to be a little bit, so my grandpa kind of started to, and I don't know. And also, like, I remember I asked my grandpa what he thought about astrology, and my grandpa was like, it could be true, but I was like, I don't like astrology. I think it's bullshit. And so my grandpa, I think that, I don't know if I encouraged my grandpa to become a little bit more rational. I don't know how much I encouraged my grandpa or how much I influenced him. But anyways, but the reason why I wanted to believe these things was because I was a Marxist leftist, and really deep down, my main thing was I wanted to destroy the white race, and I wanted to mix the white race. So anything in school where I'm learning like generalizations, I'm like, good, yeah, I like the idea of generalizations, because yeah, there's white people who are doctors and smart and have high IQs, but there's also black people who have high IQs, and we don't want to make generalizations because basically I wanted to mix the white people and the black people. I wanted to destroy the white race because I saw myself as Jewish, I think, and I wanted to defeat the white people, and I saw the white people as the biggest threats. So I latched on to any Marxist ideologies. And like, I would tell myself like, yeah, there's INTP white people and there's INTP black people. And maybe that's because they come from different classes from their different tribes. Like, maybe the teacher classes tended to be intuitives, NFs and stuff. And therefore a white person who's an NF would get along better with a black person who's an NF, and maybe they should get married, like, because I wanted race mixing. I wanted the white women to marry black men, and vice versa. And I had Jewish friends who would do that. Like, Jewish friends tended to like black people. Like, throughout my whole life, I always noticed that Jewish people tended to like black people and not like white people. And I liked that because I didn't like white people, and I wanted to mix the white race because I saw white race as the biggest threat to the Jews. So I just loved latching on to anything Marxist. So I told my grandpa, I was like, I don't like the generalizations. And my grandpa, so later, like I said, I don't know how much I influenced, but I asked my grandpa, like, why do you think, Grandpa? This is when I started becoming more of a right-winger in like 2019. I'm like, what do you think, Grandpa? Do you think that boys tend to gravitate more toward cars and stuff, cars and weapons, whereas girls tend to gravitate toward dolls because women are inherently more geared toward relationships and like caring? And that's biological. That's Darwinian. But my grandpa said, I don't really think so. I think that it's more culture and environment. But now I see why my grandpa, though, was trying to move me away from the Darwinian ideas, because I would latch onto the Darwinian ideas and say it's genes. But my grandpa, as an existentialist, he was kind of averse to the idea of genes and now I understand, because I was more averse to or more attracted to the idea of genes, genetics, controlling things and stuff. But as an existentialist, if I see things that way, then I will justify my behavior. So I might engage in promiscuous sex, right? And I'll tell myself, well, I'm just trying to spread my genes. Even though, you can really delve deep into it and say, well, that can actually backfire because that can get you killed. And in tribal societies, being promiscuous wouldn't have helped your genes. But so regardless, I might justify behavior that is what my grandpa would say not existentially valid. But, whereas my grandpa would say, if you're in the flow, genes is a material, kind of a materialist concept. But my grandpa would say everything is energy and everything is one. And you're in the flow, genes is the idea of Darwinism is kind of a self-confirmatory concept. And my grandpa would say there is no self. And my grandpa teach, don't try to be a good person, but be a beneficial presence. But I didn't understand what he was meaning. But now I understand, but I'll get to this. So, but anyways, like I said, my grandpa would teach me. And so this is like 2020. And this is when I went back to being a leftist, a Marxist, because again, my grandpa confused me. He was like, I asked my grandpa, well, is white supremacy the flow? And he's like, no. And I was like, okay, well, what about the idea that, there's an agenda to destroy the white race? And my grandpa's like, being concerned with the protection and promotion of the self is not the flow. But if you're in the flow, that's all you have to be concerned about is the flow. And I think, ironically, I think what he's trying to say too is if you're stuck in dualistic software and the illusion of the separate self and not a beneficial presence, then you can ironically, and even being a leftist virtue signaler, like let's let all the freaking let's give all our money to the poor. The rabbis even say don't do that, but it's because I'm trying to virtue signal and how great I am. That can actually destroy you, but that's not the flow, my grandpa would say. But I didn't understand what he meant by the flow. I was like, is this a hippie race mixing thing? But so my grandpa told me, no, the only thing to be concerned about is the flow. So, then I didn't understand what he meant, and I thought, okay, this is a hippie race mixing thing. Okay, so I should be a leftist again, because I didn't understand what he meant. He didn't teach me well. So, as I said, in 2020, I started looking back at the lectures I gave, and I unhid the lectures I gave in 2013, and one of them had like 10,000 views, but I got rid of that one because I said stuff in it that I don't want up, and I'm not going to get into details about that. But I started studying those lectures, and I went back during those lectures again. That was when I was a complete leftist Marxist, because that was when I went to Kauai and I was completely rebelling against my grandpa's teachings of metapsychiatry because I thought he was just a white supremacist, Nazi, and I didn't understand. So my grandpa would say that there's no such thing as racism, but I wanted to believe that there was such thing as racism because the way that I saw it, and this is the way I learned in school, I studied the evolutionary psychology stuff. I'm like, yes, there is such thing as racism, and all this stuff can be explained through genes. And the reason why there is, and I had a kind of an anti-white naturalistic agenda where I'm like, yeah, all the people outside of Africa came from one family that left Africa, and there's a lot of genetic diversity in Africa. So I wanted to like upraise the Africans and make them into like the kings and amazing, and they're genetically diverse. But everybody outside Africa is inbred. So again, we don't know if this is really true. This is a naturalistic interpretation of what happened, and it might not be true. But I wanted to believe this because I was anti-white and I wanted race mixing. So I told myself, yeah, the reason why there's racism is because, even though there's black on black racism, because I said there's so much genetic richness in the black people. So I was trying to like really lift up the black people, like, oh, they're so genetically rich. But that ironically makes them kill each other because they can recognize that they're different genetically. And that's why there's a lot of black on black crime, but also there's black on black crime because of the white people put them in ghettos, but that's also due to genetics because the white people know that they're different genetically than the black people because they came from that one family that left Africa. So they, all this is just explained through Darwinism. And even the Africans are racist toward the black people in America because Africans are their own tribes and they have different genes than the black people in America. And that's why you see racism between Africans and the black people, and it can all be explained through Darwinism, and that's why there's balkanization. But then and I was like, that's why different races and different ethnicities adopt different religions so they can maintain their genetic distinction. So this can all be explained through Darwinism. That's the way I wanted to see it. So my grandpa would say, no, it's not Darwinism. It's software. So the reason why an African, my grandpa would say, is racist toward a black person is not because he can distinguish the genetic distinctions. Because if you want to believe in Darwinism, then you're going to justify that type of behavior, and you're going to justify dualistic software. But my grandpa would say, if you're in the flow, it doesn't mean you're going to be for race mixing and everything. But when you're in the flow, you transcend superior, inferior, good guy, bad guy, cooperation, all that, and you're in the flow, and you're in like it's difficult to describe the flow, but my grandpa would say no. It's because the reason why the black African is racist against a black American is because of software, maybe superior, inferior software, maybe because he believes in Darwinism, and he needs to upgrade his software toward either cooperation or he can upgrade his software toward cooperation or the flow or whatever. Or he's even in predator-prey software, impersonal software. We don't know what kind of software he's in, but my grandpa would say, if you're in the flow, you're not necessarily, acting in a self-confirmatory manner, right? But my grandpa would say, you don't if you explain things through Darwinism, which is the way I wanted to explain things, because I was a materialist, Marxist, and I wanted to destroy religion. I wanted to destroy Christianity and say, oh, it's all just Darwinism. Really, it's epiphenomena of Darwinism, because I wanted to destroy Christianity. And I wanted race mixing. And I wanted to say, and the way that we can make everything better is if we make a forecast society where we mix all the races. But really, I just wanted to destroy the white race. But I was like, we mix all the races, and that would destroy all of the conflict in the world and all the borders, because the borders are just based off of genetic Darwinian tendencies of different ethnicities, and we should all mix them. But again, I wasn't in the flow. My grandpa would say, really, I was myself in dualistic software. I had an ego agenda. I was manipulative, and I wanted to destroy the white race because I saw Jews as not white, and I saw myself as not white. So, and I saw white people as the biggest threat to the Jews. So I really liked ideas of Freud and Marxism and Darwinism and anything that was anti-Christianity. And I wanted to believe, like, yes, I wanted to kind of justify anything that was like that seemed like it wasn't Darwinian, like the idea that there's altar boys in Christianity. I want to be like, yeah, well, that's because they were often the second-born children, and studies show that the second-born children tend to have more estrogen in their wombs, and that makes them more often homosexuals. So the families would make them into altar boys that wouldn't have sex because they weren't going to have sex anyways. They're more often homosexuals, and also there's competition among so many males over a few number of females, and by making a lot of males altar boys, especially the second-borns, this decreased some of the competition, and that was good for society and helped the genes of the society. And really, it's the selfish gene, and the selfish gene isn't necessarily mostly toward the individual, but also for the group. And by having a society that had the altar boys, that released some of the competition, which actually was good for the genes of the tribe, which, and I wanted to just explain everything, so it wasn't because of spirituality that they became altar boys. Really, at its core, it was Darwinian, because I wanted to materialize everything, and I wanted to destroy Christianity and destroy the white race, because I saw Christianity as white supremacist. I saw all religions as white supremacist. Not just Christianity. I wanted to destroy religion in general, because I just want to say it's all just Darwinism. So I was like the 1984 nightmare. That's what I wanted. And I remember I didn't like the book 1984 because it was anti-communist, and I saw myself as a communist. So, and this is the way that I looked at it. The way I looked at it was, I did want to make a society where there's 4 castes. But like I said, my grandpa, this is in like 2020. He was like, if you just work hard, then you get in the flow. And I didn't like the idea that my grandpa was always into working hard and stuff, and getting outside of yourself, and commitments and responsibilities. And, my grandpa was into the idea of, like, he was like, if, do the laundry and clean the dishes, and that takes you outside of yourself. But I was like, I'm an INTP. I spend all my time studying. I don't want to waste my time doing stuff like that. So I was like, and I thought my grandpa was like that because he's an INFP. So there's the NTs, rationals, who are the 4th quadrant, and the NFs, who are the 1st quadrant. And I'm like, and the NFs, they tend to be more spiritual and tend to be more conservative, and they tend to believe in spirituality. But I was like, but the NTs, like me, we don't believe in spirituality. We're more I believe in Darwinism and Freudianism. And I wrote all this stuff on my INTP Central, trying to make them all anti-religious, like me. This is the way I saw things. But I was like, we just care about studying and the truth and stuff. And we would like to have servants who are NFs and SJs, who are the guardians of 2nd quadrant. And I thought the NFs and the SJs, they tend to be more spiritual and religious, because spirituality and religion maintains the status quo. And the first 2 quadrants are more conservative, whereas the second two quadrants, the 3rd quadrant and the 4th quadrant, the SP artisans and the NT rationals, we're the less conservative, so we tend to be less religious, I thought. And we're more rational, and we can see the way that things really are. Like, so I like Nietzsche and Freud and stuff like that. And I was like, you guys just believe in delusions, but you believe it because it helps to maintain the status quo and everything. Or because they're metaphors that speak to higher truths and stuff. But really, I want to just destroy religion. But I was like, but I understand why you guys believe your stuff, because it maintains the status quo. And like, I was a Marxist. It keeps people in line. It keeps people from stealing. It keeps people because you believe in heaven and hell. But I didn't want to believe in heaven and hell because I want to destroy religion. You know, because I'm like, yeah, you guys, yeah, the SJs and the NFs believe in heaven and hell because they want to maintain the status quo, and believing in heaven and hell keeps people in line. You know, so I was just a Marxist, you know, and I wanted to destroy religion because I wanted to mix the white race, and I saw Christianity and religion as maintaining the white race. So, but I remember but I told myself, I studied the stories of Jesus, and I tried to make all the stories of Jesus into like Marxist, and I'll get to this more later. But I wanted to interpret it all as Marxist. But my grandpa says, no, it's not Marxist. But like one example, though, was like there's the story where the priest where a Jewish priest walks by a man who's it was a Good Samaritan story. He walks by a man who's on the road dying, and he doesn't help him. But then the Samaritan walks by and he helps him. And again, I was like, you see, the Gentiles, like the Samaritan, they're always depicted as being believers and faithful, but the Jews are not believers. But I saw belief as the second quadrant and knowing as the fourth quadrant. But I was like, but I wanted to invert everything and be like, yeah, the Jews are always depicted as not believing and being bad, because actually being bad is being good, because bad is actually closer to the flow. Because if you just believe, then you're in conformity, but conformity is still self-confirmatory, so you're not in the flow. So I would always misappropriate my grandpa's teachings to try to invert them to make it anti-white. And I wanted to see the SJs as like the SJ, the second quadrant people, the guardians as the white people, and the fourth quadrant, the NTs, as the brown people, and as the knowers. So the believers versus knowers. But I wanted to make belief bad because I wanted to destroy religion. So I'm like, yeah, well, the Samaritan, yeah, he's a Gentile. So yeah, he believes. He believes, and he helps out the guy who's laying dead on the road, or who's dying on the road. But I wanted to say, though, you know, because Jesus asked the guy, because the guy, he tells a story, and he asks the guy, who's the good guy in this story? And the guy says, the Samaritan. And then Jesus says, go and do the same. But I wanted to be like, but Jesus wasn't actually saying that he was the good guy. Because really, we don't know if he was a good guy. We don't know if he was really in the flow. And again, if you study metapsychiatry, helping somebody, how do you know that the guy that he just helped wasn't going to become maybe that guy was lying hurt on the street, dying because he was an asshole and he was a murderer, and he just tried to murder some people, and now he's lying down the street, and then this guy just saves him, but now he's going to go back to murdering people. You don't know. But my grandpa would say, if you're in the flow, then you know. So that's another thing that my grandpa, like Kant talked about the categorical imperative, like there's always something that you should do that's good. Like you should always do a certain thing, like you should never lie. But my grandpa would say, if you're in the flow, then my grandpa would be like, Kant is right. There is one right way to do it. There is one flow, but you don't know. When you're in the flow, sometimes lying would be the best, sometimes not. But if you're in the flow, it's not you doing it. And you would, you know, we don't know if the Samaritan helping that guy was really the right thing to do. We actually don't know. So I wanted to look at Jesus, the stories of the Gospels, and be like, actually, the high priest who ignored him might have been the good one. And I studied something at UCSD about that. They did a study on this where people who are busy, it was called the Samaritan experiment, where the people who are busy, like high priests, they wouldn't help the guy laying on the road. But the people who are not busy, who are just, you know, looking to help people, they would. So I was like, so actually, we don't know if the high priest was the bad guy in this story. And I wanted to see myself as like the high priest, as the NT, someone who's busy. I'm working on my philosophy, and I don't have time to help people. Whereas the Samaritan, okay, whatever, he helped the person, but maybe because he's an SJ, I want to be like, he's an SJ guardian, but I'm an NT, rational. And I wanted to see the SJs as the white people, the believers, and the NTs as the knowers. And I'm like, yeah, so I don't need to help people, but I would like the SJs to help me, but I want to focus on my knowledge and stuff like that. And that's why I hated my grandpa, because my grandpa's like, just if you work hard, then that takes you out of yourself, it gets you in the flow, you serve people. But I'm like, that's an SJ thing. And I was like, if the white people like working hard so much, the conservative white people always talk about work hard. I was like, well, then they should be the slaves. But us black people and Jews, I want to be like the Jews, we should be served. Because we should do what we're inclined toward. And if white people are so inclined to working hard and stuff, well, they should be our slaves then. That's the way I want to see it, because I want to invert everything. So, but anyways, I want to be like, yeah, the Samaritan might not have been the good guy. He's just an SJ, and SJs like to help people, and that's how they feel good about themselves. But the NT who walked by, he has something more important to do, which is the philosophy. But Jesus never says, oh yeah, the Samaritan is a good guy. He just says, go and do the same. So again, I'll get to this, but I was basically essentially a big time Marxist anti-white, but we'll get to this.